Hello and welcome back to the Carlson Cards podcast. Today we have another interview with a longtime collector named Mark. He's not only a set collector and a player collector, but he also collects players with Filipino origin. This episode is a great conversation. Mark is one of those guys that if you do not follow him already, be sure to jump on that. He's got a great attitude and is just a really bright face in the hobby, and I loved learning from him in this episode. I hope you all enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to episode 17 of the Carlson Cards podcast. We're still chugging along. Episode 17 is going to be a great one. I have on Mark, who goes by at MJS_sports cards on Instagram. I met Mark at the National this year, had a ton of fun. You know, it felt like time stood still. We were just sitting there chatting. There were so many people all around us, and it was just a great conversation. And I followed Mark for a long time and just really enjoy the way he goes about this hobby and collecting especially as well. So great episode ahead. I'm excited. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here with you, Austin.
And I know we were just chatting before we started this. It sounds like this is the first week or second week for your semester as a professor. Is that right?
Well, classes started yesterday, so we're right in the middle of it. Things are going well so far. Hopefully the students and the teacher have the same energy going forward the rest of the semester.
Are you going to pull in sports cards in a class at some point? I should have asked that before we even started. I was curious because some of your collecting kind of ties to what you teach, so that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I first came back, I didn't think I would, but in some ways it has sort of come up. And actually, in the spring, I'm hoping to teach a class called Asian Americans and Sport History. So in that class, I'll definitely bring in some of the cards that I've collected. I've also written some pieces on collecting sports cards or Filipino sports cards that I'll bring and share with the students a little bit. When I tell them a little bit about myself, I tell them that I do have hobbies too, and one of them includes collecting sports cards. I don't think that makes me look any cooler as a professor, but I think it's good for them to know that I have things that I like to do in my free time.
That's so funny. This reminds me of because I'm like, 3 years out of undergrad, I guess, at this point. But I remember every professor was so intimidating, no matter how cool they are, or no matter how cool their hobbies are. I know there's kids in your class right now looking at you like, oh, geez.
Oh, I mean, for sure. And I think that's part of the thing of being a teacher. I'm not trying to be the coolest person in the room. I'm just trying to teach them something. And like sharing a little bit about myself is not really to make myself seem cool, but like also just a little bit to make myself seem a little bit more approachable to those students that might be really intimidated of some of their teachers. So we give it our best, but I guess the way that I would say it is I don't think the students think I'm the coolest person around.
Because that's them. They're the coolest. That's what you always think
Yes,
in college.
indeed.
That's awesome. So, Mark, I was wondering if we could kind of tie in, and I actually don't know this fully. I know we chatted on it a little bit at the National, but I'd love to hear your journey back into cards and where you find yourself today. I know we touched on a little bit, I think, with about your wife, I think, if I remember right, and how, kind of she supports it and it's cool and everything. But I'd love to hear like kind of how sports cards came into your life, maybe where it originated and, kind of what you've been up to lately.
Yeah. So I collected as a kid, right? I collected from when I was like about 8 years old into about my first year of high school. And my dad was a big sports fan, Dodgers and Lakers. And I was drawn to sports cards because I loved reading the backs of sports cards. I loved reading the stats on things, right? So I would memorize players' batting averages, right? Like I would kind of go through my stack of sports cards when we would listen to Laker games and Dodger games on the radio. So it's something that I really loved in my childhood, and like many folks, kind of got interested in different things. Like packed up my collection, put it in some boxes in my parents' home, and in early 2021, there were a couple things, right? Like, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I was a very new father, right? I had a 1-year-old by that time, And, I wasn't able to do a lot of the things that I used to do, right? Like, I couldn't go out as much, and I couldn't connect with some of my friends as much, just because we were doing a lot of things, and we were really busy. And that's when I sort of stumbled back into sports cards. I I made every rookie mistake in the return to sports cards. It was at the top of the market, and I was buying John Morant base prism, and like I bought, like, I remember buying a lot of Lamelo Ball hoops base rookies, thinking I'm gonna grade these and then I'm gonna sell them, and then I'm gonna fund my entire collection that way. And so that was part of coming back to collecting. I pretty quickly realized, like, one, I'm not very good at flipping, and two, it was not really fun for me. It was not really the lane for me. And you know, I I think right there was, it was kind of like one of those forks in the road, where it was like, well, am I gonna leave the hobby again, or am I gonna find a way to enjoy this? And I think I really sat down and kind of thought, well, this is really fun. I still really like these pieces of cardboard. How can I approach this in a way that I get to continue having fun with this, and this gets to be something that relieves stress for me, or you know uh, uh, functions as some sort of nostalgic return to my childhood. And that's really where I started kind of moving in the direction that I kind of focus on now, which is, I work on completing sets. I have a couple of PC chases, and I really try to curate a collection that is more reflective of my interests and my personality, rather than a collection that I'm going to sell cards. I definitely sell cards at times because I operate within a budget, but I try to curate a collection that I get a lot of joy, and I get a lot of pleasure in, like, spending time with my cards in the evening when everyone is off to bed, and, like, I'm trying to finish something for work and I need a 15-20 minute break.
So I love this. It's very, very interesting. And I got to ask, there's a couple things I'm going to ask on here, but one of the first ones is, I know you kind of mentioned that proverbial fork in the road, right? I think I had one as well. I think a lot of people listening probably did. Um, what do you think for you was the true reason you stayed versus a lot of people have left? Do you think it is just taking that time to be creative and actually curate your interests, or yeah, like what kind of thing along the journey kept you here and anchored you here? I guess if I put it that way.
Hmm. I think um, for me, it was really that I reminded myself I'm a big sports fan at heart, right? Like, I actually like watching these sports, right? Like, I actually have really deep rooting interests. Like, I love the Lakers. I cheer really hard for a lot of the players on the Milwaukee Bucks. I like the Dodge, like, there was a Dodger banner hanging on my crib when I was a baby, right? Like, and like, I enjoy watching F1 races with my son because he loves race cars. And so, that love for sport for me is actually like, well, you have athletes that you like, you have athletes that you cheer for. Why don't you just collect their cards, right? Like, this doesn't have to be a money making thing, right? Like, for me, I started thinking of it as like, well, if this was a hobby where I didn't have to make money, but this is the thing that I did for fun, I could have an entertainment budget that I kind of allot to this, right? Like, I don't go out to bars for drinks as much as I used to. This is actually a lot cheaper than that, and this is in many ways much more enjoyable, and some of the connections that you make are much more fruitful. And I think that's what the heart of it was for me, right? Like, reminding myself, like, I'm not collecting these pieces of cardboard because I want to turn it over and 2x and 3x, right? That'd be fantastic. But I'm collecting these pieces of cardboard because, that image and that player was someone that I felt some sort of connection to, that I cheered really hard for or cheered really hard against.
That's amazing. And you kind of touched on towards the end there about, the making connections and the fruitfulness of that. And also to the bar thing, kind of funny. Instead of buying a round for the bar, you're now maybe going and buying like a Drew Holiday autograph or something.
Yeah.
So connections with others, I was going to ask, where has that factored into this journey, and especially in the side of do you feel like that's kept you here? Has that been part of this, the connections? And when it comes to this side of things as well, what would be your advice to others to make connections that feel like they're kind of in a silo right now and maybe don't know too many people in the hobby?
Yeah, I think the connections really does help a lot, right? Like, and like, I like how you were kind of thinking, bringing up instead of buying a round for the bar, you buy yourself a Drew Holiday card. But like, I've often found in the hobby, right? Instead of, well, maybe in addition to buying your friend at a drink at a show, right? But sometimes instead of that, you find a card in a bargain bin that someone PCs, and you send it to them, right? Um, I think the connections have been really helpful for me, because when I started to change my direction in the hobby, and I went through my Instagram feed, and I was like, well, you know i I want to have an Instagram feed of people that are really invested in collecting, that are really knowledgeable about cards, that really can teach me something. So I started following a lot of people that were collecting in a way that I wanted to learn, right? Learn from. And I started asking questions, um, I think I tried to do it in a respectful and polite way, right? Like, but if I had a question about something, I would go to the person that was an expert on it, right? Like, if I had a question about a patch, or like a laundry tag, I would ask a quick question to Kyle at Wax Museum podcast. And I know with you, right? I was like recently asking you questions about Peyton Manning golds and things like that. And being like really curious, and being kind of respectful of folks. I think that's one way to go in terms of building connections. But also, I would say, right, like in anything, try to give as much as you take, right? There, like, the way that I kind of approach this, right, like, is it's kind of the way that I approach the classroom, I suppose, right? Sometimes I'm going to be the expert, but sometimes I'm going to be the student, right? And I think understanding that that's all a part of this, right? Like, there are some sets I know really well. There are some things that I've really hyper focused on. But when I don't know something really well, I'm going to reach out and ask someone, and try to pay it back, or try to pay it forward in some way. Um, and I think that's a really good, helpful way of building connections. One of the things that I also started doing, right? Like, I don't think, you know, uh, I'm glad that I went to the national this year, because I had started to meet people. But before this year, I had not known that many people personally in the hobby. And one of the ways that I got to know a lot of people is just starting to engage with them on their cards, right? Like, like complimenting people on their cards, asking questions about their set chases, things like that. One of the reasons why so many of us are on Instagram is we like to show off our cards. We like to talk about them. Um, you know, and I think engaging in that way, right? Like, in a way that's not purely transactional, right? Like, not always asking to buy something from someone or sell someone something. Um, I think that's where you build relationships, and you start to build a reputation, right? Like, people know you, right? Like, it's a big hobby, but it's also kind of a small hobby, right? Like, if you're treating people poorly, like, people start to hear about that, and people start to know about that. And I think um, keeping that in mind is thinking about how you handle yourself, thinking about how you present yourself, be a decent person. Like, basically, I think is the way to go. But yeah, I think talking to people about cards, connecting with them about cards, helping them with their set chases, congratulating them on their victories, like, that's been really fun, right? Like, that's been a really fun part of the connective tissue of the hobby.
I love where you're going here, and it's a topic I don't think I've talked about on here too much, but you hinted on it quite a bit there as the initiating connections, kind of networking, right? Like, I feel like there's such a huge difference between someone getting a message of, how much for this card? Or what do you think my card that hasn't sold in 20 years is worth? It's like that person's not going to know, and that's not going to bridge a gap there. But maybe the question is more so geared towards something you're curious about, like you said. So I want to ask here, what's your approach when it comes to, let's say there's someone around in the hobby that you maybe want to learn from, who's it doesn't matter if they're well known or not, but they've been around for a while, and you feel like pretty respectful towards them, and you want to learn more from them. What's your way of going out about initiating that conversation? Like, any tips, anyone who's maybe listening and has followed, let's say, like, Mike, a huge Michael Jordan collector, a huge Kobe collector, and they want to get a connection, but they don't know how to kind of initiate that. Do you have any tips there? And I know you touched on a little bit, but I'd love to be really focused on this one.
Yeah. So this is actually something that I talk to students a lot about when they are getting to the point where they're going to start applying for jobs, and they want to like talk to big time executives, or like people that are pretty high up, or seniors in certain fields. And I think the way that I would suggest you approach this is like, you have a clear ask, right? Like, it's like, don't be too broad, right? Like, what do you think about collecting, right? Like, or think something like that. Have a clear ask. Have a clear card that you're looking at, right? Like, so I'm looking at getting a particular like low serial number patch card, right? Like, what am I looking for in the patch? What am I like? How do I know if a patch is not? It has been like swapped out. Like, what are the sort of telltale signs? So, like, the way that I would approach that is have a clear ask that the person can give a pretty quick but well thought out answer. But then also be respectful of their time, and show that you have tried to do some research of your own, right? Like, I went through this blowout thread, and I saw this, and this, but I'm still kind of curious, right? Like, how do I tell the difference between this card and this card? Or, how would you approach condition on particular patch cards? Are you particularly concerned about that? So, like, it gives them an out to give you like a one sentence answer. And sometimes people don't have time, right? Like, and a one sentence answer or a one word answer is fine, right? Like, but a clear ask, like sort of a friendly, done in a friendly manner, and respectful, like, show respect and gratitude for the time that people have taken to engage with you. I think that's one way to start. And you start to learn, like, who are people that you can start to be in conversation with, and who are people that you probably can't ask too many questions, right? Like, you learn people's personalities and things like that as well. But, like, I think having a clear definitive ask, and like, making it clear you're not trying to take up an hour of someone's day to walk you through the history of patch cards. I think that is one way to start thinking about the approach. And just be friendly, be decent. I mean, um, you know, sometimes people won't answer, and that's okay, right? Like, but sometimes people will, and you'll start to build like real connections, right? Like, it's also about just putting yourself out there, right? Like, you got to try to have some conversations. They won't always work out, but you might find some good connections along the way.
I appreciate that. That's very, very insightful. I hope that's helpful to those listening, because I know this is something that I hadn't put probably enough thought to. It kind of happens over time, but it's not like I'm as deliberate as you're laying out. So I definitely learned something there. I appreciate it. So, Mark, I was going to jump over here now. If we could dive specifically into your collection and maybe talk on some of the avenues that you collect in, because I know you hinted on set collecting a little bit. I believe this is a set you've been working on for a while. I've seen you post quite a few from this. So, would you mind telling us a little bit about the set we have in front? And just keep in mind that some might be listening on, Spotify or something, so they don't have the visual. So, if you could just describe every card we touch on here.
Yeah, so what we're looking at is the 1996-97 Skybox Autographics Hakeem Olajuwon Blue Ink Auto. And this is representative of a set that I have been working on for, I think, almost 2 years now. And that is the entire 1996 Skybox Autographics set. 95 total cards. So it's like, it's a pretty big set chase. Um, it's a pretty challenging set chase as well, because there are a handful of the cards that there are rumored to be around 100 copies or so. Some of them are short printed. Some signers never returned the cards that they were supposed to sign. So there are some limited copies of some cards in the set. And this was my big set chase for a while because this was my favorite set as a kid growing up, right? Like it was one, I think in for hoops and skybox, it was one out of 72 packs. And it was spread throughout, the set was spread throughout all of the skybox products, right? So you could find an autographics in a Z-Force pack or in a hoops pack or in a skybox pack. And so it was like a really exciting innovation for 11-year-old me to get an on-card auto in a pack. And so I started chasing the set, and like really like a lot of it was being patient on ComC and seeing which of the common cards from the set that I could knock off like for $2 or $3, and then kind of having my saved search on eBay and like following on PWCC, posting on forums to see if people had cards from this set. And I'm glad to say, like as of last week, I now have all of the cards in the set. Thanks to Signed and Slabbed, to help me get the Clyde Drexler, which was the last card I needed in the set. So now I'm just waiting on a few copies that I purchased from places like PWCC to kind of send them back from the vault. And I'm like excited to get a group picture of the entire set, and then start the new set chase.
That's incredible, and congrats on finishing. I didn't realize you had finished. That's so awesome. Work on it for so long, and then to finally have it in front of you, I imagine that feeling is going to be incredible.
It's a really, I was talking to another collector, right? Like it's an exciting and bittersweet feeling, right? Like because you're like, the chase is really a fun part of it, right? Like, and it's really enjoyable to kind of start building towards something, and then when you finish it, it's incredible and exciting, and then it's also, oh, there's no other autographics cards to kind of look for now. So, but I'm really happy and really excited, and this was also kind of something where there were a lot of collectors in the hobby that helped me complete the set, and so that was something that was a part of it that's a part of it that I'll always remember too.
So what this story reminds me of too is I heard this quote recently, and I think it applies so much to the hobby. It's a hunter's goal is not the prize. A hunter's goal is to hunt. So we're all wired to like, like you said, you got to find the next one to hunt because you feel great finishing. But a lot of the, I think, what are the happy chemicals in your brain? They come while you're
Yeah.
acquiring along the way. The journey is the most fun, actually. I would vote. I think the journey is the most fun.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I mean, I'm always going to be really happy about this set, but I'm going to miss, right, like the sort of the excitement of getting the mail day of a $2 card that gets you one step closer to the goal.
So what happens when you finish this in terms of display or storage? Like how do you what's your thoughts there? Because I'm working on a set right now too, and I've really with it being mine's close to 150. Well, you could split it on 100 and then 50 cards separately. It's like I don't know how I want to display this. Like I'm still trying to figure it out. Have you thought through it on this set?
I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think folks like Mind Cycle cards with the binders. I think it's a set that looks so good in the binder. Just flipping through the pages and seeing all of the different autographics. It's a little challenging. Some of them are a little bit higher value than I'm comfortable having in a binder, and some of them are already graded copies. So if I want it all in the binder, I might have to crack some slabs, but I think for the most part, I'll have most of the set in a binder.
That's awesome. That makes sense. And I've cheated. I have them in a binder, but they're graded, right? So I have like a PSA graded card binder that I share
Yeah,
sometimes. But that's my I think for this 2013 Select Gold set I'm working on, the Legend set, the 50 cards, I think that's what I'll do because you can actually fit 50 cards because it's 4 per page. But 100 cards you cannot fit in a binder. You need like a
yeah,
10-inch ring binder.
yeah. I have been thinking about submitting them all so that I can have like the sort of set registry kind of thing. But
Oh, true.
um,
Yeah.
and that would be really exciting. But I think right now they'll stay in the binder. They'll stay hidden away from the sun. Some of the autos have faded because they're like 20, 30 years old, and they've been sitting in a bargain bin for several years. But I'm right now they'll be in the binder, potentially eventually like a set registry kind of situation.
I suppose that's when you're going to make a dumb purchase. You say, never mind, I'm going to go spend on my entertainment, like you said, and go grade all these.
Yeah, it's like yeah, I think so.
Maybe I don't need this Gucci wallet. I'm going to go. No, just kidding. Yeah. Awesome. So another avenue that I'm pretty aware of that you collect, and I've really enjoyed seeing, because it's especially an avenue that I've never learned anything about. It's kind of something I haven't seen others do as much. So I'd love if you could tell me about some of the cards we have shown on this slide here.
So there are two groups of cards there, right? Like one is a binder page of, I guess it's 17. Oh no, it's a selection of 17 Panini stickers from this year's FIFA Women's World Cup that just completed, and it's the entire Philippines national team, right? And on the right there is a card from 1936, a German company named Seidel Werke that produced cards that were representative of the 1936 Olympics that were held in Berlin. This set's most well known for the Jesse Owens cards from the sets. But the particular card that we're looking at there is a card of the Philippine national team that competed in the 1936 Olympics. And both of these sets of cards are representative of like the sort of Filipino personal collection that I've been doing, right? I myself am a person of Philippine descent. I teach and research on Philippine history. So this is a way for me to kind of reflect a little bit of my identity, my personality, and my interests, and to follow and cheer for Filipino athletes, right? I was really excited to see the Philippines competing in the World Cup. It's the first time there's been a Philippine team in the FIFA World Cup, and the Philippines even won one of their matches in the group stage, which was really thrilling for me. The 1936 card is a really exciting one for me because in 1936, I think it's the first time that they played basketball in the Olympics, and the Philippines actually competed in basketball in the Olympics, and they went 4-1 throughout the Olympics, and their record was second only to the United States. But because of how they set up the competition, the Philippines actually didn't medal, but they did really well in that Olympic game. And just to have like kind of a card representation from those games was really exciting for me. And so this Filipino PC lane is really, I am a teacher at heart, so it allows me the opportunity to do a little write up on something about Philippine history that I think is really interesting, and share it with the sports card world a little bit. And build a collection that really makes me smile and really makes me kind of feel connected to these really remarkable athletic achievements that Filipinos have accomplished.
So a question that comes to mind with this, and obviously awesome cards and really, really unique. This is what I love about this. There's cards you don't see. Like I've never even heard of this set. So that's really amazing. A question that comes to mind is if somebody's listening and they have, like you said, a nationality or something that maybe is important to them, or their own nationality, right? Or they have a country they're a fan of, or whatever it may be. How do you go about researching these? Like, how do you even realize, like, let's say, I'm trying to think here, like, let's just say someone their family comes from Latvia, right? Like, how would you go find Latvian players? Like, how did you go about doing this for Filipino players here?
Well, for me, I always start with basketball, right? Like, because basketball is my first sport, and I'm thinking about the Philippines. So you can do some quick research on players of like a particular descent that have played in the NBA. For example, right now, Jalen Green has Jalen Green on the Houston Rockets has some Filipino ancestry. And so I've built like a small PC of his cards. Jordan Clarkson, one of my PC players, is actually competing on the Philippine national team. And so I start with what's happening today, and I start moving back from there, right? Like, and one of the cool things about sharing my Filipino PC journey is I would get messages from people like, "Have you looked at this card? Have you heard about this player?" And I get to learn a lot about a new player, or figure out a new player to collect. So, for example, I didn't know anything about hockey, and there were like a couple of hockey players. One who's really like Jason Robertson, who's doing really great in the NHL right now, and I didn't know that much about them, but like folks were reaching out to me and sharing people to look into, and you start kind of building that history. I guess I'm cheating a little bit because I know and teach the history that we're talking about here. But that's how I would start the research, right? Start with what you know, right? Like who's competing on the Latvian national team right now, right? Like, would they have had cards, right? Like one of the fun things about eBay is like I also collect popular culture cards sometimes, and sometimes throughout the day, like something will pop in my head, right? Like I wonder if Nick Offerman has any cards, or something like that, and they often do, right? Like they like that's like and that's part of the fun. Of collecting these pieces of cardboard. So oftentimes going onto eBay and saying like and just typing the person's name and seeing if any cards show up. That's one step, and starting to do some research from there to start to understand the story a little bit. For example, with the Filipino PC, like I found out that the first Filipino to play in Major League Baseball was a career minor leaguer that was called up for the Cincinnati baseball team. I believe they were called the Redlegs back then in the 1950s, and so like it took some research to kind of learn about that, but. I started looking for cards. He didn't have any cards, but he had some 3x5 index cards that he had signed. And so I was able to get a couple of those and build a little bit of a custom card to add to my little collection there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That's really, really helpful. And again, hopefully somebody listening this is helpful as well and sparks some interest. That's the fun part about this. So now, Mark, we'll shift over to, if you're good with it, your honorable mentions of your Mount Rushmore. I always throw out, you can include some, and you came up with some pretty good ones here. So I'm excited to hear the stories tied to these cards. Maybe
Yeah,
we'll start with the one on the left here. This one looks awesome. I know exactly
yeah.
what this is, and great player.
Yes, a fantastic player. So on the left there, we are looking at a 2012 Prism Gold, the only 2012 Prism Gold that I own, of Mark Sanchez, serial numbered to 10, jersey numbered 6 out of 10. And this is a card that is near and dear to me because we share the same name. Mark Sanchez was actually a student athlete at the University of Southern California. At the same time, I was a student, not an athlete, at UCLA, and so he was at my rival school and had my name. So I've followed his career, and now have followed his broadcasting journey, and always kind of rooted for him because we had the same name. So I had to get what I felt like was a big card of his, and this one popped up on ComC, I think it was, and I'm really happy that the seller didn't know how much this card would mean to me, and accepted my offer on it.
It's funny how you found it, right on ComC. It's amazing how many times that card you don't know you're looking for, and then you just spot it on there, and you're like, okay, I gotta have this card.
It has been ComC has probably for like my PC collecting has been probably the most important resource in helping me build my PC.
It's also what I was going to say here too is you mentioned it being your first 2012 Prism Gold. Be careful; they come up on you very quickly. Don't get hooked. It's bad.
They're beautiful. This picture doesn't do it justice, but they're like the shine on them is just really gorgeous. I like the basketball ones are really like just kind of out of my league expensive, but
Mhm.
I found in other sports they can be a little bit more affordable. So
Awesome. And what's the second card we have here? Also, I apologize if anyone's hearing. Someone is mowing the lawn outside of my house, and my wife is at work, so I don't know who it is. But if you can hear that, I apologize.
Well, let me know if you need to figure out who's mowing your
No,
lawn.
it's on a good Samaritan, probably a mother or father-in-law, which is kind of
Yeah.
funny. It's anyway,
Um,
second card here.
yeah, the second card here is a 2018 Court Kings Aurora LeBron James, and this is one of the case hits out of Court Kings, and it's to me, it's just such a beautiful insert set. Like it just the sort of paint background there. This is LeBron's first year cards in the on the Lakers, so that holds some meaning for me. I was able to get this because I think he goes by Mission Street Cards. It's like a big galactic, and LeBron collector was going through some consolidation recently, and sent a lot of cards for to PWCC. And this is one card that, as soon as I saw it, this was a card that I wanted to add in my collection at some point. It's graded in 8.5 in BGS, which I think put it in the range of where I could afford it, right? Like that kind of in between grade I've often found lets you get a little bit of a better deal at times.
And so remind me, is this the first year of Court Kings?
I don't think it is the first year. I think it's
Okay.
kind of in it's more in the middle of the run. And so I think I'm trying to remember when the first year is, but I think it had got it had there's at least a few sets before. One of the things that I had been doing in my LeBron collection is trying to move towards cards that I feel like have less than 100 copies of them, and I think less than 100 is like a pretty generous estimate. I want to say 50 or less, but I'm not
Mhm.
100% sure of that.
Awesome. No, that makes sense. I love that. Like keeping the scarcity, knowing there's only so many. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's I think I've learned from collectors like yourself, like that that there is that can be helpful in kind of defining the sort of lanes where you want to collect cards that will continue to be interesting to folks in the hobby.
Definitely. So third card here, I see a vintage basketball. What do we got?
So this is the 1969 Topps Lou Alcindor in a PSA 3.3.5. Right. This is Kareem's rookie. The reason why it's in the honorable mention is because it's a tall boy, and it frustrates me because I can't figure out how to store it. But it's such a meaningful card for me because I have such a high regard for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as a basketball player that played for my favorite basketball team, the college that I went to, um, and then after his career, what he has done in terms of fighting for and pursuing civil rights, and is just someone I respect a great deal. And so I'm really glad to have a copy of his rookie card in my collection. And part of why this was also a meaningful card for me is I was able to get this in a trade with a friend, like a hobby friend in California. So, I think part of like what makes cards interesting to me is both like its aesthetic as appeal, its meaning, like its meaningfulness as a piece of cardboard, but also the stories behind how I got them.
Does he tie your interest to Milwaukee? Does that come from him or does it come from Drew Holiday?
So I lived in Wisconsin for a little while and spent a lot of
Oh, you
time in
mentioned this. I forgot
Wisconsin.
about that. Yeah, you
Yeah,
mentioned
so
that.
and so while we were there, we spent some time watching the Bucks, going to Bucks games, and I developed a fondness for that team, right? Like I really have a big appreciation for Giannis, and Drew Holiday is also someone that played at the college that I went to, and like they were a team that I really enjoyed watching.
That's obvious. Yeah, I forget that Drew Holiday was on UCLA. So you have a ton of like interesting connections to the of Wisconsin and Milwaukee specifically then. That's cool.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to the true Mount Rushmore, the top four favorite cards in your collection. So I have these split between two slides. A couple were horizontal, and this one I had an extra card included on the photo by accident, but that's okay. We can touch on it. So what's the first
Sure.
card you have here on the Mount Rushmore?
The first one on the left is a 1995 Collector's Choice Michael Jordan Players Club Platinum. It's graded PSA 8. This is, one of the most meaningful cards in my collection because this is something that I pulled from a pack as a 10 or 11-year old, right? Like from a box of Collector's Choice that my parents bought me. And so it holds a lot of meaning. It's probably, one of the rarest cards that I have pulled, right? Like there is a base set of several hundred cards, and these Players Club Platinum parallels came 1 in 35 packs. So to get the Jordan in the one box of Collector's Choice that I got for that year is really meaningful for me. It also reminds me of my parents and the sacrifices that they made for me, and the ways that they put up with their 10 or 11-year old kid begging for packs of cards or begging to be taken to the card shop. And so I finally got it graded when I went back in the hobby, but it's just a card that will stay with me forever.
That's awesome. I love the tie to the childhood here. And so you said a couple hundred cards per the set, and then 1 in 35. So that's probably you're looking at like 1 in 10,000 packs there, if I'm doing the math right. I
Yeah,
guess a little bit.
I knew it was a rare sports card when it showed up on. I think he goes by MK Sports Cards.
Yep.
When it showed up on his feed, it's like, oh, I I have a really rare basketball card there. So yeah, it's a pretty it's pretty rare, and like it's also like these were dollar packs. Like Collector's Choice was like the product that kids that was made for kids and intended for kids to rip. And I love that kind of stuff, and I love the fact that you could get like a super rare parallel from that kind of a product.
Yeah, it's one thing I feel like sometimes these modern sets, it feels like it's missing. Or sometimes, like, right, I don't open boxes, but I see kids all the time. But I always feel bad when they grab like the hoops or the Donruss, and it's like it's different than back then. There really isn't those like. I mean, some of the products have like a case hit, but they're so printed, it's hard. You don't see a card like this, a 1 in 10,000 packs, like best player of all time. Like it's just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
So, second card here on the Mount Rushmore. What do we got here?
So this is a 1996 Topps Kobe Bryant, and this is also a parallel. This is the NBA 50th parallel. Kobe, as a Laker fan that grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, obviously Kobe is really important to me in my fandom. This is like I think precisely the card that I wanted to represent Kobe in my personal collection. And this is like a little bit of a testament to how my tastes have adapted over the years, right? Like the Topps base was a very popular card when I came back into the hobby in 2021, but I don't know, there are like 10 or 20,000 copies of that Topps base. The Topps Chrome one is the rookie card that we're supposed to want, right? That is the most well known, seen as the most iconic. But I was never really drawn to Topps Chrome, and I really like this card because it kind of has the shine of the Topps Chrome with a little bit more rarity, and there's not really greening is not really an issue on cards like this. And I just think it's like kind of a fantastic rookie card of his that I'm really excited to own.
So I've had an Allen Iverson of this before, and I know they're very condition sensitive. So I'm sure nine's a very, very good grade on this one. Where does the card come from? Where does the NBA 50th come from? I was never aware of like what was it a pack or how did these come out of?
It's a parallel out of Tops.
Okay.
It's like so like it's in the same. It would be in the same boxes as the Tops base, right? Like, but I forget if it's like 1 in 6 packs or something like that. But it's a parallel out of those boxes.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that it was included in Tops. And It makes me wonder, did they do that in other years? I can't recall, like Tim Duncan year, right? Like I don't remember there being like a parallel, or um even like Kevin Garnett, right? There's no, those are the year before and after. I don't think they did any sort of parallels, right?
So I think I know in 90, like from 92, 93 and onwards, right? Like Topps had like a Topps Gold parallel
Ah, yeah, that's right.
in their
Okay, yep.
packs, and my assumption was like because this was the 50th anniversary, this is like the version of that they took forward.
Oh, okay, makes sense. Very cool. And then it looks like from the photo again, I included. I thought you wanted me to show both, so they're both here. You looks like you have a Shaquille O'Neal pairing there as well. Really cool with the
Yeah,
Lakers.
yeah, you got to do the pairing, right? Like you got to have Kobe and Shaq together. And so when I added the Kobe, the first thing I did was like, well, I got to find at least one copy of the Shaq to put with it in a picture.
All right, so third card in your collection, player I very much appreciate and enjoy watching. What do we got here?
So this is a 2013 Rising Tide rookie autograph of Giannis Antetokounmpo. The reason I love this card is it has the sort of autograph that he signed as a rookie, where it's like a much more fuller autograph. His autograph has changed a couple of times throughout his career. Right by his second year, he was doing more of a GA with like a 34, which also looks really great, and now it's a little bit more of a little bit more of a quick autograph. And I really wanted to have a copy of his like full autograph, even though it's a sticker auto, which does take away a little from the card for me. But this is one that I was really happy about because it's one that I had targeted for a long time. I purchased this card from John, who's also known as Basketball Card Guy, and he's someone that we talk a lot. I've asked him a lot of questions about basketball card collecting, and this was one that we had had a lot of conversations and back and forths about, and one that was the product of like some really challenging consolidation for myself, right? Like, and so I was really happy when I was able to finally pull the trigger on adding this to the collection. So that's why that card is there.
I love the old auto, like you mentioned too, and it's interesting. I've seen them next to each other, like it's really, really noticeable. And I imagine, does are you aware if value is affected by which autograph it was? I would imagine these fuller autographs are worth more to collectors, and I
So
guess in terms of desirability more than anything.
yeah, the fuller autographs are definitely more are more valuable for collectors, right? He has a gold standard autograph, which is, I think, the only on card auto that has his full autograph,
Oh wow,
and
okay.
and that really kind of carries a premium, right? And people are really drawn to that. His second and third year autographs are also pretty popular. Because they um, are pretty aesthetically appealing, and they're like a little bit more intricate than how he signs now. And his more recent autographs, still are not cheap, but they don't carry quite the premium that as his rookie year and his second and third year autos.
It's always that dilemma of like Giannis I love and I would love to collect, but part of my logical side of my brain is saying like give it 5, 10 years, people will start to forget about him, whatever, It's always that dilemma with active versus current players. Do you run into that at all with some of these people where you kind of like maybe you grab a couple of cards, but you maybe have in the back of your mind that you're gonna really dive in on them a couple years from now?
Yeah, I think right the timing on it is really interesting. And I think Giannis is someone that I will probably have a like a higher regard for after his career. But I also think, right, like there are a lot of people that, for one reason or another just don't collect Giannis. And so Giannis's prices like, compared to other superstars in the league, right? Like um I think they are fairly reasonable, but like I think um I think the strategy of waiting a little bit can be really helpful. That's how I approached some of my LeBron collecting. For whatever reason, like LeBron cards have been kind of going down quite a bit over the last year or so, and that's kind of created some opportunities. So if you have a player that you like, think about timing, right? And like think about especially if it's someone that you're just really going to root for all of the time. Like I think timing does matter there.
Perfect. That makes sense. So fourth card here. Again, we're throwing it back a little bit. What do we got?
So this is the three-panel rookie, 1980 tops, Larry Bird and Magic Johnson's rookie card with Julius Erving in the middle panel. It's in an SGC4. I actually, up until a month ago, the most valuable card in my collection was a PSA 8 of this rookie.
Wow.
And one of the things that I did a couple of months ago or a month ago, I think, is I traded that PSA 8 for some hobby funds and this PSA 4. This card means a lot to me because I think a lot of people will point to the Fleer Jordan as like their iconic card in the hobby. This is the iconic card in the hobby for me because I was a Laker fan, a Magic fan that also had the highest respect for Larry Bird and also thought Julius Erving was one of the coolest basketball players that ever played the game. And so, when I was in high school, I worked, like a summer job at a sandwich shop to save up. I think at that point it was the $175 that it would take to get the PSA 8 copy of this card. And that card was the prize of my collection for the 20 years after. And I didn't think I would ever let go of that card. But I also told myself if I was ever to let go of that card, it will be to expand some of my collecting, and I will make sure I will always have a copy of that card in my collection. And a really good opportunity to do that came up at a local card show. And I was able to trade the PSA 8 for this PSA 4 and some cash that was really helping fund my autographics set chase, helped me fund some purchases for the national, and helped me buy some cards that I thought were a good value. And it was a really tough decision to let go of that PSA 8 card. But again, it's one of those things where um, for this particular card, the grade doesn't matter all that much to me. Like the card to my mind is iconic, whatever the grade. And I had gotten a lot of joy out of owning that card for 20 years. And I think being that I operate in the hobby with a pretty tight budget, I think it was a difficult but necessary decision to kind of make some other things more possible in the hobby. But regardless, this SGC4 copy is still going to be in my Mount Rushmore because it'll always remind me of the sort of iconicness of the card and the other card that I once had in my collection.
That's so cool. And it's awesome how at such a young age you saved up, you bought the card, and then you come back 20 years later and now you can fund your enjoyment for probably for a long while.
Yeah,
Such a cool story. You don't hear that every day.
I wish 17-year-old me had spent more money on
A 10 or
iconic
9.
sports cards
Yeah.
than he did on some other things. But
Yeah, that's funny. I think we all think that. I also wish my dad always said, he said, when you have kids, he said, whatever year they're born or as they're growing up. And somebody messaged me this recently on Instagram. I always said, buy whatever's popular for toys or cards or whatever at that time. And for me, it would have been Pokemon, that first set, but my dad didn't listen to his own advice, didn't buy any packs and keep them sealed. But it's funny to have that. Because for you, maybe it would have been something like this, right? Like buy a few of these and set them aside for 20 years. Kind of
yeah.
cool. All right, Mark. So I appreciate everything so far. We're going to jump over to like a fast 5 to wrap up the episode. So these are 5 quick questions. Kind of give me your immediate response. So number one, I'm sure many have seen that Peyton Manning will now be teaching as a professor at Tennessee. If you are given a 3-year contract to go transfer and move over to Tennessee, and you'll work with Peyton Manning, and you can do whatever subject you want, maybe if you want to stick with what you're currently doing, would you move over to Tennessee?
To teach with Peyton, to co-teach a class with Peyton Manning. I would love to co-teach a class with Peyton Manning. I would love to be a student in his class on kind of leadership and leadership development and just sort of I would love to learn how he studies and how he prepares, right? Because I think that's the thing that I was always such a big fan of when I was when I was watching him.
So second one here is, what is your number one tip on collecting with a newborn? My wife and I are looking to start a family soon, so I always wonder how much the hobby will kind of, whether it stays in the background a little more, or maybe you actually have more time because you're gonna be home a lot more. What's your tip with the newborn and collecting?
Well, I think I ended up having more time for collecting and less time for other things.
Hmm.
Um, think about card storage and store your cards at a height that your newborn or soon to be toddler will not be able to reach.
Good to know. That's a good that's a good one. I always dude, I was gonna tell you this is part of this question. Maybe I was gonna throw this in. I even this week I was taking a picture of a lot of cards because somebody wanted to buy like 5 or 6 at once, right? So I took a picture and then I dropped my phone right on the one and it just smacked it and cracked the case. And it was like a $50 card. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can only imagine the damage a young kid could do if you gave them free reign for 20 minutes.
They can do a lot of damage. One of the things that I have done with my kid though is like I've started like a small binder of cards for him. And so when I'm looking at my cards and he's shows any sort of interest, I don't know if he's going to collect. I take out his binder and like kind of show it, like have him look at it, and look at some of the cards that I have set aside for him to kind of enjoy. And some of them he will destroy, and I just we just have to be okay with that.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So third one here, what's your guilty pleasure if you had to pick a fast food restaurant?
It's got to be hot chicken.
Hot chicken? What's hot chicken?
Yeah, Nashville hot chicken. It's like a kind of a double fried spicy chicken, right? Like so, somewhere like Helen's Hot Chicken or Hattie B's Hot Chicken. It is my go-to. When we first moved to Nashville, I had it so many times that when I'd had my annual checkup, um, I had to be. I got a stern lecture about how much I engaged with hot chicken during my first months in Nashville. But that's definitely my guilty pleasure.
That's funny. So then, fourth question here, what's in your opinion, the most underrated Laker of all time?
Most underrated lake. See, I don't know. Like I thought that the most underrated Laker of all time was Eddie Jones, but when I came back into the hobby, I found out that there are so many super Eddie Jones collectors, and there's so many people that love Eddie Jones. And um, I think I'm still going to stick with that answer, but I think like a lot of hobby folks might say like he's not actually all that underrated, but he was so much fun to watch. I was heartbroken when he was traded away to make more playing time for a young Kobe Bryant. I wanted both of them. I wanted both of them to play together, but he is the Laker that I wish we all knew a little bit more.
Then fifth and final, what is the next set you're going to be collecting and how can people help you?
So the next set that I am going to be collecting is the 1961 Fleer in Action series.
Ah,
So
good.
this is like these are the in action cards. I think cards number 45 to 66 in the set. They're a lot more affordable than the base cards in the set. I am looking to complete this set all PSA slabs, all graded between PSA 2 and PSA 4, and ideally well-centered copies. And so this is going to be a set, I think, that will be a little bit slower of a build, right? To find like the right card. I think I wanted to dive into this set to really dive into a little understanding a little bit more about a little bit more about that era of basketball, understanding a little bit more about like the different ways that cards were manufactured and like the different kinds of things, and kind of understand like I've listened to a lot of people talk about vintage collecting, but I also kind of want to dive in to develop and understand what my own aesthetic tastes will be in terms of vintage collecting, and hopefully learn a little bit more about NBA history while I do it. I know most of the players in the set, but there are actually a few names in the set that um, I have very little knowledge of. So I'm looking forward to diving into that. How people can help me? Let me know if you see any of those cards that fit in within these parameters, I'm not in a rush. I think with set chasing, right, like it goes through rhythms, and right now, I am in a spot where I want to be patient in adding the things that will fit for that set, and I'm going to be saving the bigger cards in that set for the very end.
Awesome. I really appreciate it. Mark, thanks so much for joining. This was a ton of fun. I hope everyone listening enjoyed. Where can people get a hold of you if they have any questions or just want to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at MJS underscore sports cards. I'm happy to chat about cards and, like, answer questions when I do have an expertise on something, or point you in the direction to someone that I think is an expert of something. So I'm really happy to engage with folks. So do reach out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mark. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Austin.